Good morning, all. Can you hear me? Good morning. Good day.
Good day, sir.
Good day, DJ.
Good day, we can hear you.
Good afternoon.
Professor Gobadia, how are you today?
Good afternoon, DJ. How are you?
No, it's not DJ, this fellow.
Oh, Dr. Fadile, good afternoon.
Long,
How are you?
Nice to see your face again. Long
Thank
time.
you.
Yeah. Well done.
Let's start the business of the day. This public lecture series is our second public policy lecture series. And today we are having Professor N.J. Udombana. He's a distinguished professor of law with specialization in human rights and development in Africa. He has written extensively and widely, in terms of journal publications, book chapters, and he has also lectured across the globe. He's a seasoned, actually, human rights and development law in Africa, distinguished professor. Professor Udombana is ever ready at any given point in time to give his best, which he almost actually considered to be not good enough, but to his audience, it will be his very best. So we are actually happy to have you actually as our lead speaker today. Prof, you are welcome. Okay, our panelists, today include Professor Timothy Yerima, Dr. Bello Fadile from US, Professor BUK, Professor UM Shuaibu, Dean of Law, Bayero University, Kano. And then we have Professor A. Adiopo, SAN, from East Advanced Legal Studies. And then I can see on the list of participants already, Professor Damilola, Damilola Soya, and then we have Professor Amezi Gobadia, Professor Animi Awa, and then we have quite a number of actually our fellows already hooked on, and our director from Lagos General Administration. So this is what we are going to do. We would like actually to hear from our panelists for 1 minute. Introduce yourselves. Fadile.
Yeah, thank you very much, DJ, for this opportunity to be with you again. I'm Dr. Bello Fadile, retired colonel of the Nigerian Army, currently retired in the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yerima. Yerima, you are not audible. Yerima, you are not audible. Yes, go ahead.
I won't put video until when I'm ready to. I won't put video.
He should unmute his mic. Let him unmute his mic. Okay.
Unmute your mic.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much. Are you getting me now?
Yes, 30 seconds. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, DG. Professor Timothy F. Yerima, Faculty of Law, Kogi State University, Anyingba.
Thank you. Next panelist around. Professor Shuaib, Lillian Uche, Professor
Thank
Adiopo.
you very much, DG.
Yes.
Good morning, DG. My name is Lillian Uche, a research fellow with the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. Thank you, DG.
Next. Okay, I can see other professors. Please introduce yourself. Just 30 seconds. Want to know you. Yes, the floor is open. Yes, please. Please go ahead, introduce yourself. All right. Today's topic is compliance monitoring and enforcement measures to COVID-19, challenges and policy recommendations. Professor Dombana will be given 20-25 minutes to make his presentation as the lead speaker. And our panelists of 5 or 6 will take the floor for 3 to 5 minutes each to intervene. And then we'll open the floor for comments, questions, and answers. Let me tell you, first and foremost, the objective for this second public policy lecture series is simply about Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right.
Sir.
Okay, good deal. So I was saying that we set out a very simple objective for today's public lecture series. And Professor Dombana will take 25 minutes to give us the lead presentation. Our panelists will have 3 to 5 minutes each to intervene. And then we'll open the floor for comment, question, and answers. And then we'll give Professor Dombana the last 3-5 minutes to round up. And then we'll close. Let me repeat the theme for today's lecture is compliance monitoring and enforcement measures to COVID-19, challenges and policy recommendations. We chose today's topic because we want to actually find answers to certain fundamental questions. We have about 32 guidelines and protocols to observe or to comply with, all available on the NCDC website and PTF website. We have about 2 presidential regulations 2020 to observe and comply with. We also have about 26 state governments regulations on infectious diseases to also comply with or for enforcement to be actually effected. In all these actually scenarios, we wanted to find the best way to ensure compliance and also effective enforcement of all these instruments, at the federal and state level. So we invited our distinguished professor of law, Professor Dombana, to speak for 25 minutes. Prof, if you are ready, the floor is yours. Use any method you wish to simply address us in 25 minutes. Thank you very much for coming. Prof, you need to unmute yourself. We are not hearing you. Prof, we are not hearing you. Unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
You know?
We can hear you now.
Hello?
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Let me first thank the Director General of the Institute for inviting me to this discussion. And let me also acknowledge other panelists for this very important, significant event. Please permit me to also acknowledge Professor Gubadia, the former Director General of the Institute, whom I'm not seen for quite a while, although I've been receiving her greetings by proxy. Now, the DG has already announced the topic for this discussion, and he has actually set the tone by highlighting some of the measures that have been put in place. Within the limited time frame, I have a few talking points which I have segmented into 5 sections. One is to have some facts about COVID-19, which of course is already on the public domain. Please, are you hearing me, please?
Yes,
hello?
I hear you.
Are you hearing
Yes,
me?
I hear you.
Right, thank you
yes,
very much.
I hear you.
The first is just to highlight a few facts about COVID-19, which of course is already on the public domain, but we need to remind ourselves. And then I will interrogate a few of constitutional and legal provisions that might be relevant to the discussion. And then examine a few of the measures which have been put in place. The DG has already highlighted a few of those. And then look and make a brief assessment of the monitoring and enforcement measures, how far it has gone and to what extent it has been effective. And then I will end with some implications for the future. So let me start with some facts. As we know, COVID-19 started somewhere in December of last year, somewhere in China, in Wuhan, China. And by March of 2020, the World Health Organization classified it as a pandemic. And a pandemic is a disease that is prevalent over a whole country or the world. Now, Nigeria reported its first COVID-19 case on the 27th of February of this year. And the infected patient was an Italian who works in Nigeria but traveled to Milan and then returned carrying the infection. As of 2 days ago, when I last checked the portal of the Johns Hopkins University, globally, there are 6.3 million infections. Of course, as we know, the number increases almost on hourly basis. There are 6.3 million infections in 188 countries. And of this number, 380,000 plus have succumbed to death. And that represents 5.9% of still account for 907. These figures are as 2 days ago. Kano still account for 970 cases with 45 fatalities, which represent 4.6% of infections in that state. The FCT Abuja account for 687 cases with 20 fatalities, representing 4.6% of infections. Katsina State has 371 cases with 19 deaths, representing 5% of infections in that state. And finally, Edo State has 336 infections with 14 deaths, representing 4% of total infections. Of course, we know that there are other infections and fatalities in other states, but I've merely just highlighted a few of them. Now, let me briefly highlight the law that may be relevant to the discussion. And as usual, we need to start with the 1999 Constitution. But before I do that, let me mention that COVID-19 is a public health issue. And public health has been defined as the science of protecting the safety and improving the health of communities through education, policy making, and research for disease and injury prevention. Now, if we go by that definition, obviously that COVID-19 is a public health issue, a public health emergency. And the question from a legal point of view is, what are the responsibilities of the various tiers of government with respect to public health emergencies? And I begin with section 14, subsection 2B of the 1999 Constitution, which provides that the security and welfare of the people shall be the primary purpose of government. And I think it's as simple as that. Security and welfare, and that includes health, public health, shall be the primary purpose of government. And down in section 17.3, there are specific provisions relating to health, and it directs the government to direct its policy. It mandates the government to direct its policy towards ensuring that the health, safety, and welfare of all persons in employment are safeguarded and not endangered or abused, and also that there are adequate medical and health care facilities for all persons. Now, I know there have been debates about Chapter 2 of the Constitution, but let me mention that Chapter 2 is both obligatory and a primary obligation. And that by virtue of Section 1, subsection 1 of the Constitution, as well as Section 13 of the Constitution. That is different from the secondary and procedural question of justiciability. So first and foremost, Chapter 2 is primary obligation and is obligatory on all organs of government. But justiciability question is out of the discussion for now. Now, let me also mention Section 44(5)(1) of the Constitution, which permits the state to derogate from rights, certain category of rights, for purpose of public safety, public order, public health, among others. And the rights that are implicated in this regard are the right to family life, freedom of thought, conscience and religion, freedom of expression and the press, peaceful assembly and association, as well as freedom of movement. Those are specifically mentioned as the rights that are derogable in terms for during periods of public emergencies. So the Constitution does not allow the derogation of certain category of rights, even in the event of public emergencies. And the non-derogable rights are life, dignity of human persons, personal liberty, fair hearing, freedom from discrimination, as well as the right to property. These are non-derogable rights. The African Charter on its own, which Nigeria transformed into domestic law in 1953, does not permit derogation whatsoever, even in times of emergency. So obviously there is a conflict between the African Charter and the Constitution. And based on Section 1(3) of the Constitution, as well as the case of Fayemi and Abacha, the Constitution will obviously prevail from the point of view of municipal law. Although from the point of view of international law, the African Charter as a treaty will prevail. But before I leave this issue of limitation, let me also mention that even the rights that are to be limited cannot be done by executive acts. The Section 45 provides that derogations of rights must be by law that is reasonably justifiable in a democratic society. So there has to be a law, and I believe that the purpose of that provision is to allow the legislature to have debates on the public health issue in question that would justify the derogation of fundamental rights of citizens. Now, before I leave the Constitution, let me mention paragraph 17A, part 2 of the second schedule, which contains the concurrent legislative list. Now, paragraph 17A permits both the national and state houses of assembly to make laws for this, and I quote, for the health, safety and welfare of persons employed to work in factories, offices, or other premises, or in interstate transportation and commerce, including the training, supervision, and qualification for such persons. So I believe that pursuant to this provision, it is justifiable for the government to enact certain laws that could protect frontline health workers, particularly in a period like this. Now, another legislation of significance in our discussion, which is the last legislation I want to mention briefly, is the Quarantine Act, which was enacted on 27 May 1926. It's a statute of general application in Nigeria, and it provides for and regulates the imposition of quarantine and makes other provision for preventing the introduction into and spread in Nigeria and transmission from Nigeria of dangerous infectious diseases. The Act defines dangerous infectious diseases as including cholera, plague, yellow fever, smallpox, and the rest. And this includes any disease of an infectious or contagious nature, which the president may by notice declare to be a dangerous infectious disease within the meaning of this Act. Of course, COVID-19 is not mentioned in that Act. It couldn't have been mentioned. But if we apply the jus generis rule of interpretation, there is no doubt that COVID-19 fits within the ambit of the Quarantine Act. Section 4 of that act empowers the president to make regulations inter alia for the purpose of preventing the spread of any dangerous infectious disease from any place within Nigeria, whether or not, whether an infected local area or not, and to any other place within Nigeria. So essentially, the act allows the executive to make regulations for the purpose of preventing the spread of infectious disease such as COVID-19. And we'll come to that presently. Nigeria, which was made on 18th of May 2020. It includes self-isolation guidelines for Nigerians. It includes national interim guidelines and critical management of COVID, which was just made about 3 days ago. It includes COVID-19 private sector guidance, and there are a series of others. But in addition to this, the NCDC itself has also established it has also been quite feasible during this pandemic, and among the measures it has adopted include engaging states on scaling up sample collection, developing data-driven intervention plans for Bauchi State due to the increasing number of healthcare workers that were infected, training healthcare workers, undertaking on-site sample collection training, as well as engaging the 36 states on logistic management coordination relating to COVID-19. And let me also mention, as we all know, that several centers have been set up across the country for the treatment of COVID patients. We need not detail on that. We are all familiar with that. And also, following the initial reported infection in Nigeria, both the federal and state government probably put in place quarantine measures to help flatten the infection curve and prevent an overflow that could lead to collapse of health institutions in Nigeria. As we know now, it's now mandatory to wear face masks in public, to wash your hands, to use sanitizer. All of those we are now familiar now, which is now the new normal, and that is pursuant to various regulations that have been put in place by the federal government as well as the state governments. The president also enacted COVID-19 regulation, which is pursuant to the law we mentioned earlier, and it imposed significant restrictions in movement of persons and goods across the country. We are familiar with that, so I need not detail on those measures, but just to mention that such measures have been made. The House of Representatives also, as we are speaking, has a bill before it, which is to amend or repeal the Quarantine Act, and it has passed through both first and second reading. But as we know, the human rights community is quite against that bill because of some draconian provisions. Let me just read two of such provisions. It allows, one of the provisions allows a patient not to withhold any information when asked. And it provides, quote, a patient of a healthcare professional who failed to provide a healthcare professional or a person acting on his behalf with any information sought from the patient pursuant to a requirement under Section 1A that is within the patient's knowledge shall be guilty of an offense. And another provision has it that a healthcare professional shall comply with the requirement under subsection 1A to transmit information to the Director General of the NCDC, notwithstanding any restriction on the disclosure of such information imposed by any written law, rule of law, etc. In other words, it allows your doctor to divulge your medical information without your permission. These are some of the draconian provisions which had made the human rights community speak against the bill, but we are still waiting to see the outcome of that bill. On the 15th of May, sorry. Go ahead. On the 15th of May this year, the National Human Rights Commission, which is the Nigerian Human Rights SAR, also released a standard minimum guidelines for the human rights of COVID-19 patients in treatment centers in Nigeria. Now, the purpose of that is to it's a policy instrument. Guideline is a policy instrument. Together, there's a lot of noise out.
Hello, please. Somebody is talking within actually the lecture. Please mute yourself, please. The speaker is on the floor. Prof, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was mentioning that the National Human Rights Commission has also provided guidelines that seeks to mainstream human rights, both in the treatment and enforcement of COVID-19 measures that are currently in place. And then again, on the 24th of March 2020, the House of Representatives passed an emergency economic stimulus bill to protect employees from loss of jobs. And it grants certain tax relief to companies that do not return staff between 31st of March and 31st of December. I'm not too sure whether that bill has been assented to by the president, but it's not also clear how the government plans to finance the tax reforms. So these are some of the measures that have been put in place regarding COVID-19. Due to limited time, let me quickly mention, do an assessment of some of these measures. And I start by saying that compliance by the generality of Nigerians within a few weeks of the regulations were quite high. And I think a number of reasons accounted for that level of high compliance. Number one was that the zealousness of the enforcement, the security enforcement agencies that were put in place for that purpose. Although we also know that that was done at the price of human rights, which we are going to mention earlier. But also there was the fear of the unknown, which led to self-restraint by the citizenry themselves. COVID-19 it's just coming out of the stratosphere without anybody knowing the cause of it and where we are heading to. So wisdom dictated that we should be cautious about how we behave toward this virus. And also the social and electronic media also help in generating a lot of information regarding the nature of the virus. And we were watching and reading even advanced countries with better health facilities succumbing to this health crisis in their thousands. And so it dawned on Nigerians that we must be able to act on a safer level, because if those with better facilities could not control this virus, then African countries will be better advised to act cautiously. And I think this also contributed to the high compliance rate that we had within the first few weeks of the infection. Let me also mention that some state governments were quite proactive. And here I want to single out, I want to mention El-Rufai of Kaduna, who was the first governor to declare a lockdown in his state. As we know, he was also a victim of the infection. He was infected when he traveled to Abuja. But he had to quickly put in place a lockdown measure, and that also has reduced the infection rate in places like Kaduna. Lagos State government, Ogun State government, Cross River State government have also done relatively well in terms of the measures that they put in place, which also build sort of confidence on the citizens to comply with those measures. But after the first few weeks of the lockdown, for those who could just walk any of the major roads in Nigeria, we just discovered that the lockdown measures had largely collapsed like a pack of cards. And I think a number of reasons are. The first reason is that the various restrictions have had enormous adverse impacts on individuals and businesses. Millions of Nigerians have lost their income, and several thousands are concerned about their job security. Now, Nigerians cannot afford quarantine that for a long period. That's the reality. Public cooperation is needed to reach that goal. In other words, quarantine goal. And that can only occur if the government assuages the people's concerns. That's welfare concerns, which presently is not adequately in place. Now, the quarantine and lockdown have increased hunger, and hungry people are normally thrown. majority of Nigerians, by statistics, they live at the subsistence level. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that 45% of Nigerians live in abject poverty, and there are similar data all over the net. And regrettably, the average Nigerian does not enjoy social security as even enjoyed by the Constitution. The 1917 provides, among other things, that children, young persons, and the aged should be protected against any exploitation whatsoever and against moral and material neglect. And it also provides that provision should be made for public assistance in deserving cases or other conditions of need. But in practice, this provision is actually honored in breach. And the effect is that small and medium enterprises, SMEs, are seriously hit during this lockdown period. And we know that SMEs account for between 45 and 50% of employment in Nigeria. So most people are sort of getting agitated about the loss of income and loss of livelihood. Even other business, even big businesses are also equally affected. Access Bank attempted to cut its staff salaries and laid off 75% of its workforce. And the CBN had to intervene with regard to the financial sector. Arik Air, which was already in receivership before the lockdown, ordered 90% of its staff to proceed on leave without pay until further notice. It also implemented 80% salary cut for April of 2020. We know that there have been some relaxation along the line. The president has also relaxed some of the regulations, which have partially allowed the economy to open and for people to move around, but it's still under very strict conditions. And large gatherings, including schools and religious worships, are still banned as we speak. And for reasons, another issue of concern is that for reasons that we may not be able to fathom, a number of states are not being transparent with regard to the reporting on infection rates. I think that is common knowledge. And social media is agog with some states that are actually suppressing information regarding the infection rate, which does not allow citizens to actually get to know the full ramifications of this infection. Even religious leaders are trafficking in a conspiracy theory, saying that COVID-19 is a hoax, which is used to hide the installation of G5 technology in Nigeria, again, which is a rather very sad situation. Several of the face masks in circulation are of inferior quality. They are not standardized. Actually, a few weeks ago, there was a video on circulation showing a young lady who wanted to buy a face mask from a vendor, and he had to test about 3 or 4 of the face masks on her face, and then ended up not buying any. And who knows whether she was infected with COVID-19. So we will come to this policy implication later on, but the reality is that the face mask, most of the face masks in circulation are not hygienic, and they could actually complicate the situation at hand. Now, lastly, let me mention the implications involved in this during this period. And that is that security agencies that are tasked with enforcing social distancing measures have exacerbated the problem. And there have been a number of reported cases of human rights violation. On 24th of April, Action Aid, which is a non-governmental organization, issued a press release condemning COVID-19 related human rights, which include physical assault, torture, illegal sexual extortions, and incidences of sexual and gender-based violence. There have also been outright destruction of property. We are familiar with the case of Rivers State, where Governor Wike ordered the destruction of a hotel simply because the owner had breached one of the regulations regarding the COVID-19 issue. Now, on the 12th of May, Premium Times, citing the National Human Rights Commission, reported that 11 persons were killed extrajudicially in Nigeria between 13th April and 4th of May. 4 of those took place in a statewide Delta. And again, according to the National Human Rights Commission, the police account for roughly 60% of the human rights violations that it investigates, while non-state actors account for 18.3%. Domestic abuses cases are also reportedly high during this period of quarantine. So there are a lot of issues involved in terms of enforcement. Let me finally, because of time, look at what are the implications for the future. The first is that given Nigeria's large landmass and huge population, it should have been necessary from the word go to decentralize the responses to COVID-19 rather than centralize it in Abuja. So going forward, I think it will be important to decentralize such issues so that it will make it easier for the various tiers of government to have to nip the problem in the bud before it spreads. Another issue is lack of preparation for crises of this magnitude. Our health sector has been neglected for years. I think for purpose of policy and law, it will be necessary for the government after this crisis to increase budgetary allocation for the health sector in order and train human capacity. Another issue which I think is important is that there should be an agency that should of face mask and other instruments that is being used in the public, because other infections could actually result that may not be COVID related because of unhygienic conditions that we presently experience. Small and medium scale enterprises are struggling to cope with the present situation. And I think at the end of this exercise, the government might look at how they could provide some form of support and interest-free loans, since they constitute 50% of the income of the employment generation in Nigeria. I also think from point of view of policy going forward that the government should provide clear information, particularly for the grassroots level. Fake news thrive in the midst of ignorance, and only truth is the most effective weapon against. I also agree with the National Human Rights Commission that high command of the various security agencies should call their officers to order. But it's not enough. I'm submitting that all the documented human rights violations should be prosecuted, at least to serve as a deterrent for the future. And our law should also make it possible for victims of human rights to get financial, emotional, and psychological support. Of course, we know that the current justice administration laws in the country was seeking to do that, but the implementation is still a problem. So we might need to revisit our justice administration system to ensure that we have remedial justice, apart from retributive justice. It is time to review. I will soon round up. It's time to review our laws to be doing business in Nigeria. Yes?
Prof, you have a minute left. 1 minute left.
I will finish in a minute. I also think going forward that our laws for doing business should be revised. I mean, should be reviewed. Bad laws does not only make bad cases, but it makes bad economics. Sound law and policy will stimulate economic growth, generate employment, and lift millions out of poverty. COVID-19 may not be a poverty disease, but poverty accelerates its spread. The government should make basic hygiene an integral part of basic education curriculum going forward. And lastly, Nigeria is here to flatten the infection curve, going by the daily infection rate and the official statistics that are available. There's still a lot of uncertainty with regard to this virus, and the word should be eternal vigilance. I want to thank everyone for listening. I will take questions, and after the discussions, and probably make some further comments. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Odumbana, for the lead presentation. We are very grateful. I would like to give an opportunity to some of our participants that join us from the MDAs. Please, is there any representative of the Ministry, Code of Conduct Bureau, or any agency or ministry? Please introduce yourself for 30 seconds, please. The floor is open before we move to our panelists. And our professor that just joined us, please can you introduce yourself, 30 minutes. We start with the MDAs present that join us. Code of Conduct Bureau, any ministry, any agency, please, representative, introduce yourself. You have the floor. 30 seconds.
Yeah, DG, sir, Professor Peter Akwe, Director of Research there.
Thank you. Next. Next. Okay, we'll take Dr. Bello Fadile, our first panelist, 3 to 5 minutes. Please intervene on the subject, compliance monitoring and enforcement measures to COVID-19, challenges and policy recommendations. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor and Director General Nile. First of all, I thank the lead presenter for a good job. And like they say, there is no perfect suit, but perfectly tailored suit. My intervention will be, first of all, to acknowledge the proactive measure taken by the government, considering the multiple conflicts it's facing. And I want to key on some challenges that the measures provide or address or face by key actors. I'm talking about political leaders, the public health officials, law enforcement officials, media officers, civil society and community leaders, institutions and the elites, and of course, the new normal. On the political scenes, you have lack of knowledge or misinformation on what the disease is all about. And the copy and paste that seems to have been adopted does not fit into our own environment, considering the way we work. If you say Nigeria is not good enough, then what about America? And that's that the gods are not to blame. It is by trial that monkey come from tree to tree. So measures we have.
Network is bad here.
Say that again.
Network is bad.
Go ahead, Dr. Bello Fadile. Go ahead.
I was saying that in the book, the gods are not to blame. That is by prayer that monkey jump from tree to tree. You must commend the efforts of the government and the political leader, though there's no clear, specific scientific evidence. There's shortage of relevant manpower, insufficient finance. Then there's what I call shortage of trust. The government. So then you have the false propaganda on conspiracy. Now the public health officials, the challenges of shortage of manpower, the personal protection, inadequate medical facilities, and then patients, patients they have to cope with, like
excuse me. There is one barrister Kanka is talking at the same time within the lecture. Please, mute yourself. Barrister Kanka, mute yourself, please. Dr. Bello Fadile is on the floor. Dr. Bello Fadile, go ahead.
Yeah, then the other challenges faced by what I call the law enforcement officials is the general understanding or lack of knowledge of what they actually have to enforce. Well, you see a lot of them going about, no maintaining distance. Some of them don't have masks and they interact with people just because they don't know how these things are transmitted. They also have the antipathy of the general officials or the general public against the law enforcement agents. That hatred. And one way out is the training. They lack the training. One expects that as they are going out, the rule of engagement, which they have been briefed and told what to do, rather than enforcement, it should be conversational or social interaction with the public. And then, of course, we have the full welfare package for law enforcement agency, which, in a way, lead to the extortion or demand for money that they talk about. You send me out to go and do a job, and I'm poorly paid, and I see an opportunity, then I'm able to take something. This goes to address this, you need education, which is still lacking. And then for judicial officials, this is new to them. You set up an ad hoc court, and out there, very, very new. Like I said, the copy and paste doesn't work. In America, you don't have anything like that. And we need to restructure this the position to do their job if this kind of things happen. And then the civil society and the community leaders are not helping matter. The challenges they have against general misconception. Everybody is doubting it's COVID-19 or not. Or indeed the G5 that is spreading it. We have that effective lockdown and general welfare are not there. Unlike here in America, if you earn below certain amount of money, government has paid $1,200 per family. But double, they pay money for that. You do not have that luxury. But then we copy the lockdown that they have here. We have that challenges of finances for the civil society, and then the restriction of movement. Considering the way we work in Nigeria and the way we move, we forgot we are not e-learning. This time is not working. How many people can work from home in Nigeria? Take Sweden, for instance, 40% of them work from home ordinarily. And then you saw the way they try to employ lockdown and the effect it has on them. So if countries like that can have that faces, you can imagine our copy and paste will come to Nigeria. And then the death of common paste resources for addressing social and economic policy. Now, my view, my position on the way forward is the mid-time short solution is to go back to the educate and then long time redress the pattern in application that we need to apply. I think today the NNPC is launching its own apps of contact tracing. That is the normal state. That's the new normal. How prepare at the government, both state and federal, in applying the pattern application for e-learning, e-commerce, and e-everything, like we are doing now. This help, for instance, in distance, social distance. It also helps in spreading the news and taking control of the social media, what we have on there. And then we're able to disseminate, and then the information can be eliminated. I think also today, the government has given concession to state two other things. And I just want to recall that I think Thursday last week, the government called on the international community on what can be done, how the world should come together and help. And this is what he said: global solidarity only hope. That it's only global solidarity to help humanity to be able to reverse the effect of COVID-19 on human race. And he calls for death nation, especially in Africa. So that
okay, Dr. Bello Fadile from US, you have 30 seconds left.
Okay, so that is my thing. Let's apply the new normal. Go pattern way. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bello Fadile from Houston, Texas, US, for joining us as a panelist. Professor Timothy Yerima, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please. Professor Timothy Yerima, second panelist, you have 3 to 5 minutes. The floor is open for you to intervene. Next panelist would be
DG.
Okay. 5 minutes.
Thank you, the DG and the paper presenter. I had actually had problems with my network, and I've just recollected. So I did not actually hear most of the things they present, but I was here from the beginning, and I was able to grab most of the points, which not entirely different from what I have here. Because of time, I would go straight to say that the COVID-19 pandemic, just like the Spanish flu, is a very serious threat to health and life generally. And it was based on that the president utilized his power under the Quarantine Act 1926, for the COVID-19, and issue regulations. Various regulations are stated by the presenter. I would like to say that COVID-19 and the various state responses to COVID-19 have raised some fundamental issues and challenges revolving rule of law and fundamental rights. And in this regard, about 4 areas have to be taken into consideration and very important. One is to do with the issue of whether human rights emanating from government response measures, COVID-19, whether there are issues, and I answer this question in the affirmative. The second one is whether the federal government and state governments are under obligations to protect or ensure the protection and respect of the life, rights, and fundamental rights of citizens in times of COVID-19 episode, and that question too is answered in the affirmative. And importantly, and that is one of the things that also always sink into oblivion, is the duties of individuals during this period of COVID-19. And I said that individuals have duties to perform. Because of time, I would like to say that COVID-19 affects all the 3 generations of rights by my own, from what I've seen, and from what the presenter also presented here. And some of these rights are not absolute, as he said. They are listed under in section 45 of the 1999 Constitution, and even Article 4 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It could therefore be said that based on section 45 of the 1999 Constitution, the Quarantine Act of 1926, and the presidential orders, state orders, justify why there are restrictions in all parts of the country. Indeed, there was and there is a health emergency in the country. But from reports gathered and from what we have been seeing, including the 105 cases monitored and recorded by the National Human Rights Commission and other non-governmental organizations during the initial lockdown, and now the various security agencies go beyond the ambit of
Yes, Professor Yerima, are you having a problem, technical problem? Apparently so. I hope it's not power failure on your part. All right, can we have the third panelist? Professor Shuaibu or Vivian or Professor Adoko? Next panelist, please, 5 minutes. Okay, I can see some guests that join us from HP. HP.
Let me talk now.
Yes, go ahead. Lillian, take the floor.
Okay, thank you, DG, sir. All right. Okay. So I have, I want to first of all thank the presenter. He has actually raised a lot of issues here.
So please, can you focus on the challenges and policy recommendations? Go ahead.
Yeah. All right, sir. So the issue of the human rights actually that have been in play in the whole pandemic thing. Like they have said, a lot of human rights. For me, there are actually 3 rights at the front line in this current pandemic. And they are the right to life, which is supposed to be the primary focus of the state by addressing the general conditions in the society that give right to threat to life. Then there is also the right to health and access to health care. Then there is a central challenge to freedom of movement, you know. So, and this freedom of movement is the most common public health measure that states have taken against COVID-19, that by restricting movement through the lockdown and the stay-at-home instructions. Then I also have this. It is said that the best approach to enforcement is actually to minimize the need for it. So it becomes logical that in a pandemic, the role of law enforcement agencies is likely to be redefined, at least temporarily, in terms of enforcement and their contributions to helping citizens to cope and survive. So in that case, I would think that the best strategy to adopt should be the community-based intervention. You know, so that should be community mitigation as the primary, should be a priority strategy for the law enforcement agencies. There should also be large amounts of communications of highly technical information that's for citizens in order to help them protect themselves. Then I also pointed out some issues like leadership. You know, one reason is that decision-making responsibility is delegated to the lowest rank, because those are the officers who encounter clusters of problems and all that. And in doing this, these are the only ways you can ensure voluntary compliance and cooperation from the citizens. There is also need for partnership, which is a key solution to the underlying problem between police and other agencies. Then the presenter talked about decentralized decisions. Then I think he also mentioned education, and I've mentioned information. So finally, I think Nigeria needs to develop a pandemic guideline in case of times like this. So thank you very much, DG.
All right, thank you, Lilian Oche. Next panelist, Professor Shuaibu from BUK or Professor Adeopo, SAN. I know he's busy right now in the committee. Yes. Next panelist, 5 minutes, please, before we open the floor to other participants. Yes. Okay. We have guests from some ministry department agencies that join us. I can see one HP. Can you please introduce yourself, and then you have a minute to take the floor? What does HP represent from the screen? Are you first? Okay, Dr. Ilori. Dr. Ilori. Dr. Ilori, you have 2 minutes. Yeah. We can't hear you. You need to be audible. Yes, Dr. Ilori, take the floor. You have to mute yourself. Okay, I can see former DG Professor Ameze Gubadia. You may wish to take the floor on challenges and policy recommendations, the way forward. 1-2 minutes if you have to.
No comment.
No comments. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Olaide Bademosi. Professor,
can I talk now, please?
Yes, please.
First of all, let me appreciate my prof, Professor Ndubana, and other panelists and everybody there for allowing us to express ourselves. And this type of situation, this was the best we needed most. But my only question is that In South Africa, there is a court rule that it is unconstitutional for this lockdown in South Africa. How can we reconcile that section 45 of Nigeria with the decision of the court in South Africa, sir? Thank you.
Your name?
My name is Dr. Inka Ilori from Babcock University.
Okay. I can see Professor Peter Akpe, you want to take the floor? Professor John Amale, the floor is open. Professor Larry Chuku, the floor is open.
Good afternoon, DG and other distinguished participants. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello, DJ. Can I be heard clearly?
Yes. Your name?
Hello, DG. Yes.
Yes.
First, let me appreciate my colleague, Professor Dombana, for a very insightful presentation.
Your name?
I think, yes, Larry Osi Chukwu. I'm a professor of commercial and property law, University of Abuja, and member National Policy and Justice Implementation Committee. Actually, it's from that committee that I got invitation to join this. Yes. Now, I think you need to highlight some of the human rights violations involved, especially in the implementation of the regulations restricting movements during the lockdown. Take, for instance, the use of the mobile courts. We know that the mobile courts, the modus operandi, many people were just brought to the magistrate at a point and there and then charged with offense or violations and summarily convicted and sentenced. Many of them never even had the opportunity of consulting a lawyer if they wish, which is their constitutional right, that anybody charged with an offense is entitled to a lawyer of his own choice, legal representation. Well, thankfully, in some places, particularly in the FCT and I had in Benin and some other places, the NBA had to step in to raise some committees to do pro bono services. I mean, I think that is one of the challenges that we have. That such a situation, you should even have lawyers from Legal Aid Council and other government agencies on standby for each accused, in quote, accused person to stand in as his lawyer. I don't think government put that in place. We also know that some people were charged with offenses unknown to law. Classic example is the case of Funke Akindele and her husband that celebrated birthday in Lagos. And we were told they were charged with offenses, bordering hosting more than 20 persons in their house, and at the end of the day, they were convicted and even supposed to pay some fines. At any rate, there was no such provision, whether in the regulations made by Lagos State or the national regulations or even the Quarantine Act. So both the offense and the penalty for the offense that was imposed on them, they were unknown to law, and we know this is a serious constitutional violation. And I believe even these convictions, they will count for anybody who had been convicted as a conviction. And for instance, if the person wants to apply to Nigerian law school, the fact of the question there, have you been charged with any offense before? Of course, he cannot say no. They have been charged and they've been convicted. So he's an ex-convict in the strict sense of the word. So having observed that, since we don't have much time, I need to ask Professor Dombana when he's going to react. He mentioned in his recommendations that laws for doing business should be reviewed, some of the business laws. I think it needs to pinpoint or highlight some of these laws that needs to be reviewed, and they suggest the line of a review that is, by and large, I think this is a very useful conversation, and I congratulate the DG and those who organized it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Larry Chuku. Professor Deji Adekule, Professor Peter Akpe, SCN, please, the floor is open. We have 1 to 2 minutes for intervention. As we await one of the panelists, Professor Shuaibu from UK, having some technical challenges to join us for his 35 minutes. Please, the floor is open.
Okay,
you,
is
DG.
my okay.
Thank you, DG.
Thank
just
you.
a quick one to request if Professor Dombana, who
Your
spoke
name,
very
please,
well.
so that I can know.
Adekunle is my name. Deji Adekunle is my name.
Thank you.
So I want him to ponder the question whether the lopsided enforcement and implementation would probably have been better if the president had gone by way of a state of emergency. Because when you look at the patchwork of regulations, and it's a very funny patchwork, in fact. If you want people to comply, because you spoke on compliance, there has to be clarity on your regulation. When you start with regulations affecting just 3 areas of the country, i.e. Lagos, FCT, and Ogun, you just leave, that means you are leaving the field open for governors to do whatever they like. And you mentioned the issue of proportionality, laws that are reasonable and necessary in a democratic society. Would you say that an emergency proclamation would really have been more apt than the Quarantine Act, which is really addressed to quarantining people who are infected? I'll be grateful if you address that, please. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Professor Deji Adekunle, SEN, the immediate past DG of the Institute. Professor Akpe, Professor Shuaibu, the floor is open. Please take the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, DG, for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I have a few concerns I want to raise with Professor Udombana, and I hope that in response he will probably be able to clarify this. Now, I do not call myself a constitutional lawyer, but I do know about the doctrine of covering the field. Now, public health issues matters under our constitution that are under the both federal and state legislative competence. And so I've asked myself, what is the place of the standards set by the federal government and vis-a-vis the ones set by the states? I've noticed in some of our responses that the federal government makes set some standards, and some states either refuse to comply with that standard or set even a much higher standard. So I've asked myself, are citizens not expected to have some reasonable degree of uniformity from one state to the other in a federation such as ours, or states can be allowed? And I give an example where federal government eased lockdown on movement and then, of course, worship in some places, but some states have continued to keep that in place. So I ask myself, what is the response as far as citizens are concerned? Are they entitled to feel that they can move from one place to the other and expect uniformity, or that it will depend on how each state reacts to a situation that federal government has actually set standards for? So should we then say that the doctrine of covering the field will only apply to law and not just to other subsidiary, if you like, legislation or standards put by the federal government in response to this pandemic? Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you, Professor Peter Akpe, SEN. The floor is open, Professor Shuaibu. I can also see Professor Animi Awa. Please, another person can take the floor. And also, there are representatives from some MDAs. Please feel free to take the floor. 1 minute. The floor is open. Yes, the floor is open. Professor Animi Awa.
Good afternoon.
Yes.
Yes, am I being heard?
Yes, go ahead, take the floor.
All right, thank you. Mine is just a concern. I know that in his policy recommendations. He said, going forward, the federal government or state government will revisit allocation to the health sector. But I know that they just approved 2020 budget. From the analysis so far, shows that the health sector is not even given priority in terms of funding. And we also know that there have been signals that we are likely to have another crisis on our hands with Ebola infection because of our proximity to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where this virus is already active. So my concern is it that our policymakers are not taking into account the health challenges that we are facing now and the need to increase the intervention in the health sector? Or is it that we just deal with issues as they occur and not give it a holistic kind of outlook? That's just my concern.
Okay. The floor is open. Any other person that wants to take the floor? Professor O'Malley, Dr. Uwem Eten. Any other person? The floor is open. Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. All right. Can we ask Professor Dumbana to provide some 5 minutes response? You can select responses. You are not audible, Prof. You need to mute yourself. Mm-hmm. Yes, Professor Dumbana, you have the floor. Go ahead. We can't hear you, Professor Dumbana.
Are you hearing me now? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Let me thank the panelists and the discussants and all those who have made quite insightful contribution to read the discussion. I can really address just a few of the questions. I think others were concerned regarding budgetary allocation. I share the same concern, obviously. They are quite of, there is need for prioritization of the essentials as far as the welfare of Nigerians are concerned. China is what it is now because they prioritized some of the things that were important for them some years back and invested enormously in those issues, and now they are taking over the world. Education, health, and several other issues are important for the development of the society. I think the earlier governments realized that the better for all of us. Now, someone asked whether the doctrine of covering the field applies to regulations. I don't think so. The Constitution talks about exclusive legislative list as well as concurrent legislative list. It did not talk about concurrent regulation. So I don't think that covering the field applies to executive legislation or policy. I believe there has to be actually an enactment by the National Assembly which may touch on certain issues that also concern the states. But even at that, covering the field is not absolute. States are still empowered by law to enact regulation, to enact laws on those issues that have not been sufficiently covered by federal enactments. And I think there are a number of authorities on that. One of them is the Attorney General of Ondo State and Attorney General of the Federation, relating to the ICPC Act, which was challenged during the Obasanjo administration. So the answer to covering the field is that I don't think covering the field applies to executive legislation. There has to be a law to that effect, and it's not absolute. So it doesn't really mean that states may not still enact their own legislation for areas that are ambiguous or that have not been sufficiently covered. Now, LOC Chuku, my colleague, my friend, asked question regarding the laws on doing business, and he wanted me to pinpoint some of them. I'm sure it's common knowledge, for example, that the tax regime in Nigeria is quite hazardous. There are multiple tax regimes in Nigeria which discourages businesses. We have tax regime from the federal government, tax regime from the state government, tax regime from the local governments, and they are quite difficult for small businesses to cope with. And then, of course, we also are familiar with the high interest rate in Nigeria. And I think the central bank needs to step in to regulate some of the interest rates that are being charged by commercial entities, which is actually not helpful for small and medium-scale enterprises. I'm sure we are familiar with some of these issues, so there's no need to detain on that. Now, Professor Dekunle asked whether it would have been better to use state of emergency rather than regulation pursuant to COVID-19. I think the result probably will still be the same, because whether it's state of emergency or regulation that is made pursuant to Quarantine Act, the question is still the issue of enforcement, monitoring, and providing security valve to ensure that those who are out of work or those who are unemployed at least have been catered for. So whether we will have adopted the route of a state of emergency, which probably will have applied to the entire country, I'm not too sure whether we will have achieved a result that is better than this, but that is debatable, but that's my position. Because the factors that have affected implementation will still have applied. Someone asked a question regarding a decision in South African Constitutional Court declaring the lockdown as unconstitutional and its implication for Nigeria, or how we can reconcile that with Nigeria. South African Constitutional Court is a municipal court in South Africa. Its decisions are not binding on Nigeria. So the lockdown is made pursuant to a regulation, a law. The lockdown follows a regulation. The regulation itself is made pursuant to the Quarantine Act, which permits certain regulations. It did not define the kind of regulation, but it allows the president to make regulations for purpose of for periods like this. So I think it's open question whether such a regulation could be challenged in Nigerian court, but obviously South African court does not have the binding force of law in Nigeria. That is very clear for all of us who are in the legal profession. I don't know if there are other issues that I have not touched upon, but generally I want to thank everyone for your contribution and insights. We are still in an unknown territory, as I mentioned earlier on, and the watchword is eternal vigilance. I think the civil society of which we are part of, we have a responsibility to continue to raise these issues and to also collaborate with the various authorities, whether they are security authorities or executive arms of government, to ensure that the laws themselves are respected and that the regulations are targeted towards addressing the problems without violating the human rights of citizens as guaranteed under the Nigerian Constitution and other instruments. Once again, thank you for listening and thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you, Professor Ojombona. We would like to actually leave the floor open for the next 5 minutes, only to other participants that are not panelists from different MGA and organizations that join us. Please, if you are from any organization, ministry or agency, please, you have the floor. Take the floor for 1 minute, introduce yourself, and say a word or two. The floor is open. Yes, the floor is open.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yes, my name is Muhammad Lawal. Okay. I just want to share an opinion regarding issue of the use of state of emergency principle. I believe that
is the organization or institution.
Okay, I'm a legal practitioner in Kano, and I also work with Bayero University Kano.
Okay,
Faculty of Bayero University Kano.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I think that what the president was supposed to have done was to invoke state of emergency rule under section 305 of the Constitution. And the reason is that the derogation under section 45, which allows derogation on section 35, is only when there is state of emergency rule. Now, using the Quarantine Act will not serve as good basis for the actions of the president regarding the constitutionality of the regulations that were proclaimed. So the regulations were not actually constitutional if you look at it in view of the provision of section 45, which only allows derogation from section 35 only when there is state of emergency. And there is no issue of state of emergency under the Quarantine Act. So in my humble opinion, I think state of emergency would have been better than to form a strong basis for the regulation proclaimed by the president rather than Quarantine Act. Thank you very much.
Okay, just a little bit of a correction for the last speaker. You see, every national response measure to COVID-19 or to any pandemic or epidemic must be based on the national risk assessment of that country. That is one. Second, our constitutional frameworks are not necessarily uniform across the globe. They are not. Section 45 of the Constitution of Nigeria can be seen actually in two parts. Part one allows for exceptional measures in the context of public health, public safety, protection of the rights of other citizens and their freedoms, to be a basis for any regulation to be made in the context of an epidemic or a pandemic. The second component of Section 45 is where you go for full-blown state of emergency, which requires the intervention of National Assembly, either in the state of war or in such a large scale, actually public health or public safety or security measure. So the president decided to choose the first arm, i.e. taking the exceptional ground platform that is reasonably describable in democratic society, okay, for the protection of the rights of others and freedoms, or for the protection of public health, public safety, public morality, etc. That is the first component. So you need not always go into the full-blown declaration of state of emergency. That will require a lengthy procedure involving National Assembly before you can actually trigger that clause. So I think we should get the Section 45 clearly in context. The lead presenter rightly made that particular clarification and then build the legal and constitutional foundation for the president's choice of the Quarantine Act and the regulations that is empowered to make. The state government equally enacted, about 26 of them, equally enacted, infectious or dangerous diseases, regulations, also pursuant to the same actually Quarantine Act. That is a choice. So far, across the globe, out of about 211 countries and islands, only 80 countries went to the full-blown declaration of state of emergency. The rest of the countries, including Nigeria, chose exceptional measures within their constitutional framework. So let us not create a confusion. The position of the president in taking on the exceptional measure instead of full-blown state of emergency is constitutional, it is legal, and it's also valid and it's legitimate. So let us not mix the two, please. Thank you very much. Next person who wants to intervene, you have the floor.
Bro.
Yes, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Bro.
Yes. Who wants to take the floor? Introduce yourself. 1 minute.
Bro. Dr. Bello Fadile again.
Okay, 1 minute.
Okay, I just want to emphasize again the legality of the regulations that were passed and have been enforced. For instance, take the case that went as far as to the Supreme Court of America last month, where the Supreme Court ruled that the regulations by the California governor that you cannot have more than 100 persons or 25% of your capacity in the church. 2 church leaders went to court and the Supreme Court ruled that that regulation does not violate the Constitution of America. So those are the areas, and then we copy, and then we don't copy widely, and we don't understand. We must consider our own environment. Why didn't they declare state of emergency on the multiple conflicts that we have? We have Boko Haram, we have the banditry, we have the herders and farmers conflicts. Let's face the situation we have. What we have is what it is. What we have is what we address. And how do we modify and work on those issues? Please, let's leave legality and face the suffering that the people are facing and how we can redress it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think there's also one component of the compliance, monitoring, and enforcement measures that we've not sufficiently tackled. That is the social protection measure. How compliant have we been, and how far have we monitored compliance with the social protection measure to COVID-19, and also those that are expected to provide some degree of enforcement of the social protection measure, how far have they gone? And this actually brings the question of the palliatives in the way we are actually ensuring that the palliatives reach the target group or not. Yes, the floor is open to other participants that are on the screen or that are actually on our list from agencies, ministries, and other organizations. Please, you have 1 minute to take the floor. Introduce yourself.
Hello.
All right. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Motsorayo, and I'm a student at Babcock University. And I would just like to make a comment in line with what Dr. Bello said and my professor, Professor Odumbana. And it's with regard to the restrictions. I feel that what we have done in Nigeria is a lot of copy and pasting due to other restrictions and modes of enforcement that have been done in other nations. And I think it will be a lot better if what we want for ourselves can be expressed, because that's why we have issues with enforcing lockdowns. I personally feel like there might be things like social distancing, which is good, but then I don't know if it would properly work in a state like Nigeria with so many people having like communal living being a part of who we are. So I think that just a contribution to say that as Nigerians, what we want for ourselves must always trump what other people are doing or what the West even wants for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you want us to reflect our local peculiarities in our compliance, monitoring, and enforcement measures. Thank you. Yeah, we have we have 2 minutes. We have 2 minutes more. So any other person that has not spoken,
okay, I have not spoken, and this is from a code of conduct.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, Ogonda is my name from Code of Conduct Bureau.
Okay, you are welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to make my contribution in 2 areas very briefly. The first one is in respect of community responsibility and individual responsibility when we have this kind of pandemic. But as far as individual responsibilities are concerned, I think the organizers have done a very good work. But the community responsibility was sidestepped. In this case, where we will have needed the support and the services of public health officers, those trained nurses about public health that could go into the community or that could use any of their media as they may be locally approved, either going back with a microphone and so on, from house to house, from place to place. If you rely solely on the aspect of enforcement by legislation or by penalty, people will just accept such things, or when those enforcers are not available, they will do whatever they like. So I will just want to humbly recommend that even right now, the services of public health officers that have been played down have to be played up so that you can go into. The second part, sir, is in respect of monitoring and supervision. When a program of this nature with that kind of colossal amount is put in place, and that is also involving a lot of personnel,
I think we should have put in place as well supervisors and monitors. And this is where our own bureau comes to play, because constitutionally we are expected and we are granted the legal authority to enforce the performances of public officers. So, my concern and my suggestion is that those who can enforce this kind of program should be added as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Code of Conduct Bureau. We know you have a constitutional and statutory responsibility to monitor compliance with certain standards within the constitutional framework. And I think it will be a very good job if you develop a framework, because speaking, we need somebody to monitor those monitoring compliance. There must be a monitor of monitors of compliance, and there must be a monitor of those enforcing compliance. So this is one area where Code of Conduct can come in, because a lot of billions are being took out on social protection measures. Who is monitoring those that are actually, implementing these measures to reach out to the public? Somebody must be the monitor of these people or agencies that are actually charged with this responsibility. So I think Code of Conduct Bureau, you are most welcome. If you develop your implementation, your guidelines and framework for monitoring compliance of the monitors and enforcers, believe you me, you will actually achieve double objective. First, you will help us in sanitizing and upholding the integrity of the constitutional and legal framework in combating COVID-19. That is one. Second, it will also help us, truly speaking, in protecting the rights of Nigerians who feel vulnerable in the way we are enforcing the measures, to COVID-19, which affects them, largely affecting vulnerable groups, largely affecting small-scale businesses, self-employed businesses. These are the ones that are vulnerable, and they will continue to be disadvantaged unless you have a monitor to monitor the enforcers and those trying to enforce compliance. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We will take the last contributor. Any contribution from the floor? Last one, then we'll run off. Okay, our time is up. So we'd like to thank all of you for participating, and our sincere gratitude to the lead presenter, Professor Odumbana, and then also to our panelists, Dr. Bello Fadile, Professor Timothy Yerima, Professor Shuaibu who had a technical problem, and then other William Uche and other panelists that also chip in. We'd also like to thank other participants who voluntarily joined us and made a very useful intervention in this regard. Our time is up. I'll see you next week for our next episode of this policy lecture series. Professor Odumbana, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for us. We're grateful. Bye-bye. Bye for now. Bye-bye. Thank you.